Alright, we are live for the fourth week in a row here, where I will be discussing today a biographical analysis of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, ruling monarch of the United Kingdom and head of the Commonwealths. So, before I start, go ahead and share this video with anyone and all your friends. Let us know what we can do right and wrong. Add friends. So, we're going to start off a little easy. So, Queen Elizabeth II was born actually and christened Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor as her name. She is the elder daughter of King George VI, who was at the time the Duke of York, and Miss Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. Now, Elizabeth's early years were spent at what we know as 145 Piccadilly, which is the London house which her parents had taken up shortly after her birth. And she also grew up at the White Lodge in Richmond Park. She also spent time at the country homes of her paternal grandparents, who were King George V and Queen Mary, and then her mother's parents, the Earl and Countess of Strathmore. So we're going to kind of do an overview of her life, and then we'll get into her life in more detail, as I do with all these. As I said, she was born Princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary on April 21st, 1926, in London, to Prince Albert, the Duke of York, and he was later known as King George VI, and Miss Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. She married Philip Montauban, the Duke of Edinburgh now, in 1947, and she became queen on February 6, 1952. She was crowned on June 2nd, 1953. She's the mother of Prince Charles, who's the heir to the throne, as well as the grandmother of Prince William and Prince Harry. She's also the longest-serving monarch in British history, and she's tried to make her reign more modern and sensitive to a changing public view. It's kind of just an overview about her. In 1930, she had gained a sister with the birth of her Princess Margaret Rose Windsor, and it was a small family of four. So, with her, they did not realize when she was born, most people, that she would actually become the Queen of England. She was not in direct line of the throne because her father, Prince Albert, was the second son of King George V and Queen Mary. Elizabeth got to enjoy the first decade of her life with all the privileges of a royal without actually having to have the pressure of being the heir apparent, meaning in line somehow. Her father and mother were also known as the Duke and Duchess of York, and they divided their time between the home in London and the Royal Lodge, which is the house in the Windsor's Grand Park. Elizabeth was nicknamed Lilibet, and her younger sister Margaret, they were educated at home, privately by tutors. Academic courses included French, mathematics, they had history, dancing, singing, art, you name it, they had to take it. Now, with this, before I continue on to my next section here, once again, you can share this with family and friends. It's always a good thing to. Our moderator tonight is the same as he has been the last few weeks, Mr. Frank Nordstrom. Ask questions, make comments. They're always welcome. We love to see them. Besides me just sitting up here speaking, it's just a way for us to get to know all of you and get to see what questions you actually have. I'm pulling up all my notes right now because my computer stopped working for a second. Alright, so with Queen Elizabeth, there we go. Now it's coming up. She's, as I said, the longest-serving monarch in British history. 63 years on the throne. Before her was her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. So, her life kind of changed in 1936. She was very young at the time. And her grandfather, George V, had passed away. And she was known to be very close to her grandfather. Her uncle, Edward had become King Edward VIII. However, he was in love with an American woman who was also a divorcee, Miss Wallis Simpson, who was not allowed to be received in court according to the English laws and customs. So he abdicated his throne, and he chose his heart over the crown. He chose to stay in love rather than be king. And at that point, the Duke of York, Prince Albert, became King George VI, took his name after his father. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, only 3 years later, Elizabeth and her sister, Princess Margaret, largely had stayed out of London. They were relocated to the Windsor Castle, and from there she made the first of her many famous broadcasts over the radio to the British citizens. With her speech reassuring the children of Britain who had been evacuated from their homes and houses, it really grew the country together, and kids were sent to the countryside, people stayed in London, and it made it as if the family was still there. The 14-year-old princess at the time had a calm and firm personality, and she had told the kids in one particular broadcast that in the end all will be well, for God will care for us and give us victory and peace. She was very well outlooking. Elizabeth soon started taking on some more public duties, and she was appointed Colonel-in-Chief of the Grenadier Guards by her father, and Elizabeth made her first public appearance inspecting the troops in 1942. She also began to accompany her parents on official visits within the British Isles. So even at a young age, she was taking on very strong and independent roles, as well as showing that even though she wasn't born to be the heir to the throne, but now that she automatically was, she can handle it. In 1945, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service of Great Britain, which would help in the war effort. She trained side by side with other British women to be an expert driver and a mechanic. While her volunteer work only lasted a few months, it offered her a glimpse into a non-royal world, what people were actually going through. And she had another vivid experience outside of the monarchy when she and Margaret were allowed to mingle anonymously, actually, among the citizens on Victory in Europe Day. So, Princess Elizabeth had first met her future husband, Prince Philip, who was the son of Prince Andrew of Greece, when she was only 13, and she started falling in love with him right off the bat. Distant cousins, technically, the two had kept in touch over the years, and they'd eventually both fallen in love with each other. And yes, for those who are wondering who that was my grandmother coming in. I'm using her computer tonight. She needed something. Anyway, as I was saying, they were distant cousins, and they had kept in touch, but had eventually fallen in love with each other. They made a very weird and unusual pair together. Her father, King George VI, was hesitant about the match because Prince Philip had ties to both the Danish and the Greek royal families, and he didn't possess great wealth. And his personality was, how we would say today, rough. However, he had permitted the wedding, and at the time of their marriage in 1947, Great Britain was still recovering from all the damage from World War II. Elizabeth herself, in fact, had collected clothing coupons to get fabric for her own gown. The heir to the British throne had to collect coupons to get her own dress. Just think about that in today's, how we would feel today about, let's say, the president's daughter. I mean, it's just given to him. Well, think Kate Middleton. She just got the dress. They didn't pay for it. Same thing. The ceremony was actually held at London's Westminster Abbey, as always, and on November 20th. Now, the couple wasted no time in producing an heir. Prince Charles was born the following year, and Princess Anne was born in 1950. And on February 6, 1952, unfortunately, King George VI died. Elizabeth assumed the responsibilities of the ruling monarch. She and Prince Philip had been in Kenya, actually, at the time of her father's death, so she wasn't even there when he passed. Her official coronation took place later on June 2nd, 1953, in the Westminster Abbey. For the first time, the ceremony was broadcast on television, which allowed people from across the globe to witness the pomp and the spectacle of the event. This is a good time. If anyone has any questions or anything, I can answer them as well. Share this on your Facebook. If you're watching on Ustream, if you're watching on YouTube, share it. Like us. Join us and subscribe on YouTube. We're here every week, and right now it's just been me, but there is a panel and different things. Frank Nordstrom's our moderator tonight, which I can't thank you enough for being. And any questions or anything, we're more than happy to answer it. So we're going to talk a little bit about her world travels as a monarch. So she's had a long and really mainly a peaceful reign. It's by vast changes in her people's lives and in her country's power. It's changed a lot since she came to power, since she became queen. Britain is viewed abroad, and how the monarchy is regarded and portrayed now is a big thing. It used to not be like that. She is a constitutional monarch, so she does not weigh in on political matters, nor does she reveal her political views. And, however, she regularly confers with her prime ministers, and having had working relationships with 12 prime ministers during her reign, which some of the most famous are Winston Churchill, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, and the most recent former Prime Minister David Cameron. She also has worked with 12 different U.S. presidents and during her reign. Her reign, as I said, came from 1952. So if we take a look at that, on who we had during her reign, it's really interesting. 63 years. I'm pulling up my list now. I have a full. So obviously she's been with the current president, Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton, George Bush the First. She had Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, President Ford, President Nixon, President Kennedy, President Hoover, and President Eisenhower. So it's 11 presidents right now. It'll be 12 with whoever we elect. 12 prime ministers, 11 presidents. It's a very interesting thing, but as we change our leader every 4 years, England changes their prime ministers based on whoever the Queen actually appoints. The prime minister, as many people don't know, is not elected by the Parliament. It is he or she, as we have another woman this time, is actually appointed by the Queen herself. Spilled some water there. So, when Elizabeth had become queen, post-war Britain was still a substantial empire. There's an old saying that actually still continues to this day, that is the sun never set on the British Empire. At some point, there was always sun shining on a country, whether it be New Zealand, Australia, England herself, I mean, all the way over to Canada and beyond, all her territories and commonwealths. During the 1950s and 1960s, the very substantial domains and dependencies were actually possessions that achieved independence, and the British Empire evolved into what we know as the Commonwealth of Nations now. Elizabeth II has thus made visits to other countries as head of the Commonwealth and a representative of Britain. Now, she did a groundbreaking trip to Germany in 1965. It was very interesting. She was the first British monarch to tour there in more than 50 years. So, we'll get to how many different things she's done as just an amazing monarch. During the 1970s and 80s, Queen Elizabeth continued to travel extensively, extensively. In 1973, she attained the Commonwealth Conference in Ottawa, Canada, and in 76, she traveled to the United States for the 200th anniversary of America's independence from Britain, which is different. If you become a country and the former leader, heir to the throne of the former leaders of your country, you gained independence, why would they come? She came to support us. More than a week later, she was actually in Montreal, Canada, and she opened the Summer Olympics. In 1979, she traveled to the Middle East, and she was in Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, and Oman, which had garnered a lot of international attention, as well as widespread respect. A lot of leaders had not gone to the Middle East because there were still problems at this time. Middle East, at one point, a very good chunk of it was owned by Britain under the empire. And my computer froze again. Sometimes these technical issues happen. Okay, so the Queen has changed her family name. She's under the House of Windsor. However, she declared that not technically declared, that all her descendants shall have the personal surname of Mountbatten Windsor, which is her husband's last name with the hyphen of Windsor, her royal name. One of the biggest fights they had while she was becoming queen was the fact of what would her regnal name be. Meaning, as I had said, her father was Prince Albert, but chose the regnal name, the name that people know him by, as George VI. A lot of times people take names because of people. She was a very simple woman, as she still is to this day, and said, well, then I'm going to be choosing Elizabeth. My name's Elizabeth. I'll be Elizabeth. So we're going to talk about the royal family a little more. As I had said, she had Prince Charles and Princess Anne, but she had two more children, son Andrew and her other son Edward, in 1960 and then in 1964. She's worked tirelessly to protect the image of the monarchy and to prepare for its continued future. In 1969, she officially made Prince Charles her successor by granting him the title as the Prince of Wales. Hundreds of millions of people had tuned in to watch this happen and see the ceremony, as it was once again the first time it was ever done on television. In 1981, Prince Charles had married 19-year-old Lady Diana Spencer, with rumors had surfaced later on that he was pressured into this marriage from his family. Now, I was around, and so were many of my friends, when Prince William got married, and the wedding had drawn enormous crowds in the streets of London. Millions watched. Charles was actually watched by more. And public opinion of the monarchy at this time, while he was getting married, grew exponentially and was very, very strong. The following year, Elizabeth had worried about her second son, Prince Andrew, who served as a helicopter pilot with the British Royal Navy during the what we know as the Falklands War of 1982. Britain had went to war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands, and a clash that lasted for several weeks. More than 250 British soldiers had died, and Prince Andrew luckily returned home safely, and it was much with his mother's relief. Now, being queen, you also, just like any leading person, whether you be political party, president, prime minister, you get threats and you have scandals. Any leader would. So Elizabeth as queen has had her monarchy come under attack a lot. The once revered institution of the monarchy has been weathered by a huge number of storms, bigger than Hurricane Matthew that we're having right now and Superstorm Sandy a couple years ago. They've had a lot of death threats against their family. In 1979, Elizabeth had suffered a great personal loss when her husband's uncle died in a terrorist bombing. Lord Mountbatten, as he was known, and several members of his family were aboard his boat on August 29th off the west coast of Ireland. And when the vessel exploded, and it was later known, after it killed him and one of his grandsons, as well as two other people, the IRA, which is known as the Irish Republican Army, which had opposed the British rule in Northern Ireland even to this day, they ended up taking responsibility for that attack. They'd be equivalent to what Timothy McVeigh would be to the United States. In June 1981, Elizabeth herself had a dangerous encounter. She was riding in what's known as Trooping the Color, which is a special military parade to celebrate her official birthday, when a man in the crowd pointed a gun at her. He fired, but fortunately, the gun was loaded with blanks. And other than receiving a good scare, the Queen was unharmed. She had an even closer call the following year, though, when an intruder actually broke into Buckingham Palace and confronted Elizabeth in her own bedroom. When the press got wind of the fact that Prince Philip was nowhere to be seen, they speculated about the state of the royal marriage. Were they having problems? Did he hire him? So forth. Creating a lot of inner problems for her. Oh, and my computer stopped again. So, with Queen Elizabeth having these scandals, the biggest scandal was yet to come, actually. And it wasn't by her, it was by her son, Prince Charles, the heir to the throne, even to this day. Prince Charles had an affair during his marriage to Lady Diana Spencer with the woman who is now his wife, which we will get into. The love lives of her children, as I had said, it caused such a headache for her. The rocky marriage already between Prince Charles and Lady Di made headlines for years as they had announced plans to divorce in 1992. Prince Andrew's own union with Sarah Ferguson ended up in the tabloids with photos of his wife with another man engaged in romantic activity, to put it lightly. The Queen's own husband has inspired numerous public relations headlines with his off-the-cuff, edgy comments and rumors of possible infidelities. In 1997, she went under intense media scrutiny in the wake of Lady Diana's death. Princess, but Lady Di as she's known. Her incredibly popular ex-daughter-in-law sometimes was nicknamed the People's Princess. She died from injuries in a Paris car crash on August 31st. The Queen was at her memorial estate in Scotland with Prince Charles and his and Diana's two sons, Prince William and Prince Harry, at the time of this accident. For days, Elizabeth remained silent while the country mourned Diana's passing, and she was sharply criticized for her lack of a response at the time. Diana's passing and funeral kind of fueled public sentiment against the monarch. She wouldn't give her a royal funeral. Nearly a week after Diana's death, Elizabeth had returned to London and then issued a statement about the death. It was something that the people kind of resented towards the Queen. She's very well liked, one of the most liked monarchs in British history, but they resented her for not giving Lady Di a royal funeral, which would be expected of any princess, but because she was divorced, she was no longer royalty. Now, after the start of the 21st century, Elizabeth had experienced two great losses. She said goodbye to both her sister and her mother in the same year of 2002. The same year that she also celebrated her 50 years on the throne, also known as a Golden Jubilee. Now, Margaret, Princess Margaret, her sister, known for being more of an adventurous soul than most other royals, and she was actually barred from marrying an early lover, she died that February from a stroke. And only a few weeks later, the Queen Mother, Elizabeth, also known, who is Elizabeth II's mother, died at the Royal Lodge on March 30th at the age of 101. Now, Elizabeth is known even to this day to kind of be stuck to the traditions and ceremonies. She has still to this day shown no signs of softening her stance on that. So she had objected to the relationship, as I said before, of Prince Charles and his current wife Camilla Parker Bowles, with the pair having been involved while he was married. Substantial, right? She's the reason why Lady Di and Prince Charles got divorced. However, she allowed them to wed in 2005, and Elizabeth and Prince Philip, her husband, had a reception in their honor at Windsor Castle. Elizabeth has also emerged as a devoted grandmother to William and Harry. Prince William has even said in interviews that she has offered invaluable support and guidance to himself and his wife, Duchess Kate, when she was Kate Middleton and they were planning their 2011 wedding. That same year, Elizabeth had actually shown that the crown still had symbolic and diplomatic power when she became the first British monarch in 100 years to visit the Republic of Ireland. The last monarch had visited in 1911. She's also done a lot of things for the monarchy, such as modernizing it. She had dropped some of its formalities and made certain sites and treasures more accessible to the people. And Britain and other nations have struggled financially, so she has welcomed the elimination of what was known as the Civil List, which meant it was a public funding system of the monarchy, meaning taxes were paying for the Queen, as well as whatever money they already had, which was roughly a 250-year policy. The royal family continues to receive some funding to this day from the government, but the Queen actually has had to cut back on her own spending. Her Diamond Jubilee actually was just celebrated not that long ago, in 2012. Despite the occasional call to step aside for Prince Charles, Elizabeth has remained steadfast on the throne. Her duties have been passed on to her eldest son to prepare him to become monarch, but she still maintains a very, very busy schedule. She handles more than 430 engagements a year herself, and she supports hundreds of charitable organizations and programs. Elizabeth had celebrated her Diamond Jubilee in 2012, which marked 60 years on the throne. As part of these festivities, a special concert put on by the BBC was held on June 4th. It had the likes of Shirley Bassey, Paul McCartney, Tom Jones, Stevie Wonder, you name it, they were there. She was also surrounded by her family, including her husband Philip, her sons Charles, and her grandsons Harry and William. Then, on September 9th of 2015, she surpassed her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, to be British longest ruling monarch for 63 years. So she's on her 64 years now, as we just had 2016. In 2013, Elizabeth had celebrated another happy event. Her grandson William and his wife Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge now, welcomed their first child, George Alexander Louis, who's known officially as His Royal Highness Prince George of Cambridge, on June 22nd in the same year of 2013. Elizabeth visited her new great-grandson after William and Kate returned home to what's known as Kensington Palace from the hospital. Now, on May 2nd, 2015, William and Kate once again welcomed a child, Miss Princess Charlotte, who is the Queen's 5th great-grandchild. Now, our moderator asked a really good question about Prince Charles. So, let me put my notes on Prince Charles. Had to sign into my other account. So, Prince Charles, in the English set of Freemasonry, the crown is the head of Masonry. Prince Charles is then the head of Masonry. However, the Duke of Kent, Prince Edward is actually the Grand Master of Freemasons of England and Wales since the year of 1967. He's head of what is known in England as the Parliament of Man, the Masonic Parliament of Man. And Prince Charles, when he assumes the throne, is when he will become official head of the British Masonry. He's very much a supporter of Masonry. A couple of his charities actually come from it. And it's just something that's really nice to see, that it's a worldwide epidemic. So we're going to move on to more of her personal life a little for a while. So Elizabeth actually is not big on having the spotlight on her. She likes quiet pastimes. She enjoys reading, especially mystery novels, as it's been known to come out. She loves crossword puzzles, and she even watches wrestling on TV, which is interesting. You don't imagine the Queen or a president or someone watching wrestling on TV. For much of her life, she's actually surrounded herself with dogs. We all know that she has a love for corgis. They're always near her, always with her when she's traveling. It's really cute to see. She's also a very avid horse enthusiast. She breeds thoroughbreds, and she attends several racing events throughout the year, both official and unofficial with the Crown. She's someone who is admired by both her own people and people abroad. Just some quick fun facts before I get into some details about some things. The Queen receives about 3 million items of correspondence a year. Tony Blair was the first Prime Minister to actually been born during her reign and served during her reign. The official wedding cake at the Queen's wedding was made by McVitie and Prince Company, who used ingredients given as a wedding gift by the Australian Girl Guides, what we would know in the U.S. as the Girl Scouts. Now, the Queen has given out about 75,000 Christmas puddings to staff, and continuing custom of King George V and George VI. Now, since 52, the Queen has given the royal assent to more than 3,500 acts of Parliament. Meaning a royal assent means that the Queen agrees with it. Laws in Parliament are passed whether or not the Queen signs them. It's not like the U.S. where both houses of Congress have to sign, the President, or agree and vote, and then the President has to sign it. Queen doesn't have to sign it. They pass it, it's law. But if she gives it a royal assent, it means that it is strongly recommended and agreed upon by the Crown. The first football match the Queen attended was actually the 1953 FA Cup final. The Queen has crossed a corgi with actually a dachshund, who's now dubbed the Dorgie. It was an unwittingly sparking the crossbreed dog craze. She unknowingly decided, we're going to start crossbreeding a lot more dogs, and a lot of people started doing it because of her. The Queen is a patron of more than 600 charities and organizations. All of the breeding pairs of mute swan in Britain are officially owned by the Queen. And the Queen has sat for at least 129 portraits. She also owns all the dolphins and whales, orcas, within British territorial waters. Which is interesting. Noah had mentioned that earlier in the comments, and it's really interesting. So, people have talked about where's the monarchy today. How many people actually in the British Empire or Commonwealth support the monarchy, because Canada is part of the Commonwealth. People don't know that. The head of Canada is Her Majesty. Now, she's represented by the Governor General, the Prime Minister, and the members of Parliament, but they are headed by the Crown, same as Jamaica and several other countries. They're the Commonwealth. Well, in 2006 is the latest poll that we have a lot. The MRI poll was conducted on behalf of the Sun newspaper, and an overwhelming 72% of the respondents were in favor of keeping the monarchy, and it may have been down to the country's respect and affection. It may have come down to the country's respect and affection for Queen Elizabeth. Now, an even greater percentage, 85%, were satisfied with the way that the Queen carries out her role as the monarch. When asked if the Queen should ever abdicate and retire in favor of her son, 64% had stated that she should never retire. She should die on the throne. Which at this point, in 2016, she celebrated her 90th birthday at an age when most people would have retired for many, many years. And although she and Prince Philip will be handing some of the responsibilities to younger members, she's still very much a ruling monarch and in very well health. She does a lot still. She's just a remarkable person who we don't think she will ever retire. She will most likely pass on the throne, giving Prince Charles not too long to be on the throne. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the line of succession right now with the British throne. The line of succession is very interesting. It's due to several different things. So we have Queen Elizabeth right now as head. The first in line to take her spot if she were to pass or abdicate would be her son, Charles, the Prince of Wales, who's the eldest son. After him is Prince William, who's the Duke of Cambridge, who's the eldest son of Prince Charles. Then it is actually, people think it would go to Prince Harry, his brother. It is Prince George, the 3-year-old, who's the son of Prince William. And then it's his sister, Princess Charlotte, who's only a year, the daughter of Prince William. Then it would be Prince Henry, or Harry, of Wales. Then it would be Prince Andrew, who's the Duke of York, who's Prince Charles's younger brother. And then it would be his 2 daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. Then, once again, Prince Edward, the younger son of Elizabeth II, and then his son, Prince James. Then it would be Lady Louise Windsor, who's the daughter of Prince Edward. Then it would go to the Princess Royal, who's Anne, the first daughter born, who's daughter of Queen Elizabeth II. Then it would be Peter Phillips, who's the son of Anne. Then Savannah and Ella Phillips, who are the daughters of Peter. Then it would go to Zara Tyndall, who's the daughter of Anne, and then Mia Tyndall, who's the daughter of Zara. So this line goes, Prince Charles, his descendants, if they all die, then the next kid, his descendants, next person. It's a very interesting way. Women never used to be in the line of succession in Britain. Queen Elizabeth I actually changed that. Her father and her did. King Henry VIII. Henry Tudor. And this allows for them to be in the line, but not the direct line. If Elizabeth and Margaret had a brother, no matter who was born first, he would have been first in line for the throne. And Elizabeth still would most likely not be queen to this day. It's unfortunate, but it is law. It's just as our line of succession in the United States. If the president becomes incapacitated, it goes to the vice president, Speaker of the House, Secretary of State, and so on. When do I get to be king in the line of succession? Well, the way my family works, in the Scottish line of succession, which has been hooked since James I of England, who's also James VI of Scotland, my line of succession kind of goes down for a while. If Scotland were to become separate, I'd be directly in that line, but because we're the monarchs ahead of both, I'm like 7,600 and something in line. There's so many people before me, and no one counts after the first 100 in line of succession, because after that, no one's going to do it. So with this, taking a quick break for a moment, need to grab some water. Share this video, like it, see us on YouTube afterwards, join us, become a member of the discussions. We want the panel and as many people to join us as possible. I don't want it every week where I'm just sitting here lecturing you as if I'm in as if you're in college. The last person in the line, according to the British Constitution, by the way, is actually someone who was born in 1999, 2 years younger than me. Benjamin Ferner Beckner. I'd have to remember he's the child of, but he's the 100th in line for the throne. After that, it becomes a very gray situation. Now, there were actually a lot of people in between in that line of succession that became ineligible from becoming King of England by being Catholic. You cannot be Catholic anymore. When Henry VIII was king, he split from the Roman Catholic Church and created the Church of England, mainly because he wanted to marry Catherine of Aragon, or divorce Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn. Now, Henry VIII was someone who, without appreciating him, you can't appreciate Elizabeth II. He had many wives. An old saying and joke to remember his wives is divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Catherine of Aragon he divorced, and that's what took the split from the Roman Catholic Church and made the Church of England. He beheaded his second wife, who he's madly in love with, apparently, Miss Anne Boleyn. Then Miss Jane Seymour died. He married Anne of Cleves, who he divorced. Then he married Catherine Howard, who he beheaded. And then he died, and Miss Catherine Parr survived. So this is kind of where the split came and why now the Queen is not only the head of Masonry, she's the head of the Church, she's the head of the Commonwealth, she's the head of the country, she's the head of state, not the head of government. The head of government is the Prime Minister, which is a lot different. We don't see it in the United States as our head of state is also the head of government, but in most countries, if you were to go to the Czech Republic today, there's a president of the Czech Republic, but there's also a prime minister. And the president is the head of state, but the head of government is the prime minister. Now, going back a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit longer about her prime ministers. She's had a relationship personally with all of her prime ministers. She was seen closer to Harold Wilson than she had with Edward Heath, and was certainly closer to Tony Blair than she was with Margaret Thatcher, which kind of shows her political beliefs. They believe her to be center or just left of center, what we would call, in today, if she was a registered voter in the United States, she'd probably be a Democrat over a Republican, but it's still not known. She also has enjoyed close relationships with Ireland, and having expressed support for the Good Friday Agreement, which eventually brought peace to Northern Ireland now. With her international relationships, she had very, very close friendships with Nelson Mandela, Mary Robinson, and George Bush, who was the first U.S. president, actually, in over 80 years to stay at Buckingham Palace at the request of the Queen. Now, despite a succession of controversy surrounding the rest of the royal family, particularly throughout the 80s and 90s, Elizabeth has remained remarkably uncontroversial herself and is widely respected throughout the world. It was tested in 99 when she was perceived, like I said, to be unmoved by the outpouring of grief for the death of Lady Diana, the Princess of Wales. But besides this, she herself has remained a member of integrity. She's someone who most in England would look up to. And she's someone who internationally gains respect. I respect her, and here I am in the United States, and there are many others throughout the world. Now, where was I? Queen Elizabeth popularity is not just restricted to the British Isles, actually. Recently, referendums in Tooele and St. Vincent and the Grenadines in 2009 rejected proposals to abolish the monarchy. Scotland had recently voted on a referendum to separate themselves from England and sever the crowns once again, and it was voted, unfortunately to my dismay, but it was voted to keep the Queen the head of the country and to stay a part of the United Kingdom. Queen Elizabeth is someone who we in today's world need to emulate. She's full of integrity, she's widely respected, she's loved by people throughout the country and the world, and she's someone who keeps going. In today's world, we always stop doing stuff. She keeps going, and she's someone who the people will always remember and always love. So go ahead and share this video. Tonight's talk was a little shorter as it was a biographical analysis. It was not an hour and a half, not an hour. It was about 50 minutes or so. Any questions, comments, we'd love to hear them every week. We love to have you come and join us on the panel. This will be on our YouTube channel. Type in Discussion Central as we're known, or my name, Spencer Dayton. You'll find it. It comes up all the time on YouTube. And you can share it with your family, your friends. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have you as a moderator. We'd love to have you as a guest on the show speaking about something you like. Please participate in the polls every week. That's how we decide what we're going to be talking about. It's not what I decide. I usually have 48 to 72 hours to research this stuff if I don't already know it. And usually I still have to research it and find out different things. So I hope you're all doing well tonight. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.